Saturday, we were discussing the impact of automation, AI, robotics, IoT, and the future of Japan. So, where will Japan have? Where will Japan be able to get a dominant position in the market in the longer run, so that we may lose jobs, but what will happen to Japan in the short to middle term run in terms of employment? So where do we have a chance to compete globally? And in order to answer that question, I looked at some of the mega trends, the big trends that are happening in Japan at the moment, that are more or less unique to Japan in comparison to the rest of the world. So the things that are occurring here and not occurring outside of Japan. And why is that important? Because if they're occurring here, there are problems that will be addressed in Japan, if we want it or not. And if that is and if that is happening, that will mean that we will have solutions. We will have developed solutions that other countries who will reach in similar situations will have to tackle themselves. So at that point in time, to be hoped and expected that Japan will already have solutions for it. So that will create business opportunities. So what are the things that are happening here in Japan that are a little bit different from the rest of the world? So first of all, and an obvious one, is the aging of society. So Japan's population is growing, is aging more, is aging at a rate that is much higher than the rest of the world at the moment. So we are the first society that is already aging, that is decreasing, and this means that there will be a higher life expectancy and more care will be needed. So Japanese citizens are healthy as a whole. That means that they need care for a longer time. How are we going to take care of that? Because there will be, relatively speaking, fewer citizens, young people who can take care of elderly people, not only physically, but also monetarily. So that means that we will need to either allow for more immigrants into Japan, or we could find other solutions to take care of them. It is quite likely that it will be, especially those other solutions that will prevail in Japan. So that I'm thinking about, for example, what we can do with robotics and AI to directly support the care for elderly. Then what it also means is that if we want to do that, we will need to increase the output per worker, per young worker. Fewer workers will need to support a larger group of elderly people. That means that we need to raise our GDP. And in order to do this, we need to increase the output per worker. As it stands, we see that Japan's labor productivity, especially in the white-collar sector, is below that of a lot of other countries in the OECD, and it seems quite likely that in Japan we will focus on technologies that will allow us to increase the output per worker. Then individualization. Japan, as Uno-san mentioned last Saturday, has a very large part of our society are single people's households. So people who do not live with a partner or a family, or live by themselves. Especially problematic for men in their middle 60s, 65 and older. About 1 in every 3 men in that age category is living by himself. Now, most of these men, especially in that age category, have not been taking care of themselves, have not been cleaning, doing the laundry,
Right.
do not know how to cook, and that's problematic. And they will need outside support to take care of these tasks.
Yes.
So that will also create an industry in Japan where we can be an example to the rest of the world.
Right.
Loneliness will be a big theme in these single people's households. Loneliness will be more prevalent than in current society. There will be uh, a depopulation in the countryside. There's fewer job opportunities, so not many young people, many single uh, households with elderly people.
Mm.
That is something that we will not be able to deal with uh, easily. So it's quite likely that we will develop solutions there that could be sold to the rest of the world. Um, then what we already see is that Japan is globalizing very rapidly. At the moment, they're leading in foreign direct investments worldwide. In the last 2 years, Japan had by far the largest share of FDA, and that is, I think, a trend that will continue. One, because uh, Japanese companies will need to develop their market,
Mm.
and in a shrinking domestic market, they will have to look outside to do that. Um, plus, um, with a shrinking labor population, for production, they will also need to rely on outside workers. So globalization seems to be a no-brainer, and it's supported by the fact that a lot of Japanese companies have a cash surplus, which makes it uh, quite easy for them to buy uh, foreign companies. Another point that is problematic, actually, when we're looking at what is needed in Japanese society, that will cost a lot of money. And for a lot of this money, we will need to rely on the government. But we have the largest public debt as a share of our GDP in Japan,
Mm.
and it's only rising. So how are we going to pay for all this? That is still a question that needs to be answered.
Mm. Mm.
Um, then we touched upon the um, examples of industries that could, where Japan could be um, leading the world. One of the examples was environmentalism. Japan is very advanced in terms of garbage management, how to separate garbage, how to deal with garbage in a metropolitan society. It is a sociological
Mm.
phenomenon that people feel very much uh, responsible for their own garbage, and therefore they are very eager to separate their garbage and not throw it around as in other parts of the world. But that's not the only side of the story. The other side is also that the governments in Japan have been successful in managing garbage
Mm.
um, and keeping cities very, very clean.
Mm.
Another example, of course, is public transportation. Japan is the only country I know, almost the only country I know where people do not own cars. Almost very, very few people in Tokyo, they own a car simply because it is much more efficient to
Mm.
use public transportation. So this kind of public transportation infrastructure, the way to manage it, that could be an example for the rest
Mm.
of the world. Um, Not only public transportation, but also the way that you are managing a metropolis is something that could be something that we can export. That know-how, technology um, is something that where we could lead. the rest of the world. New metropoles will rise
Mm.
within the next years. We will see a concentration of labor in the cities.
Mm.
Plus, we will see new metropoles rising in well, probably Western Africa first, and then we may see some metropoles develop in Eastern Africa and South Africa. Then another thing, and that is a sociological thing, where Japan has a unique position, is that the Western world is rapidly individualizing. Where we used to have a sense of community, where family took an important role, where family were larger when we were relying on each other. We see, especially in the past 10 years, we see individualization, and that leads to more or less antisocial society. This didn't happen in Japan. Everywhere in the Western world, we see individualization, populism rising, but this doesn't happen in Japan. Why not? We have some unique characteristics that will be an example for the rest of the world. So here, again, we have our know-how that we will be able to export to the rest of the world. So there are certain opportunities, there are certain developments happening in Japan that will lead to development of new products and services. At the same time, Japan has managed to maintain certain things that other countries did not, have been losing very rapidly. And these unique circumstances, unique situation will help us to develop very specific knowledge that we could export to the rest of the world.
Right. Okay.